Ami Colé is going out of business, and we have to talk about it. By the way, I'm KJ Miller. I'm a founder, lecturer, and content creator. I love talking about all things business, beauty, and pop culture. If you like any of that, be sure to subscribe. Now let's get into it. So, like many of you, I woke up to the news yesterday that Ami Colé was shutting its doors when the founder wrote an article in The Cut, which I am going to read the headline of. The headline is Why I Am Closing Ami Colé. My beauty brand offered Black women shades they couldn't find elsewhere. Why wasn't that enough? And that was written by the founder, whose name I'm now going to do my best to pronounce, Giada Nje May. And I'm so very sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. But she wrote this article. It was published yesterday. I'm recording this on Friday, July 18th. This article came out July 17th. And it caught me by surprise. And I will say, as the founder of a brand, Mented Cosmetics, that very much operated in the same or similar spaces as Ami Colé, focused on women of color, focused on deeper skin tones, focused on inclusivity, this story really broke my heart, but also in a lot of ways felt like a mirror, because I feel she went through so many things that Mented went through, and we almost ended up with the exact same fate. And so reading through this article and all of the things that she talks about in it, it felt very, very familiar to me. And so I pondered on whether or not I wanted to comment on it, because ultimately this is her journey, the founder's journey, her brand, and her moment to really talk about what happened, how much she wants to share. All of that is totally up to her. And in no way am I trying to step on her toes or clout chase. What I did feel compelled to share, though, in this moment is how brands can get to this point and why it seems like it happens so often for Black owned brands. I want to give my perspective on that. So what I feel comfortable sharing is not, hey, how did this happen to Giada and to Ami Colé? That's not my story to tell. You can read what she shares in The Cut. And I think she gives us a high level sense of what happened. She doesn't break down the nitty gritties. I actually would like to break down the nitty gritties based on my experience. And again, I'm speaking for me, and in some ways speaking for the other founders that I have spoken to who have found themselves in similar positions. So that's what I'm going to do in this video, with the hope that it is helpful for anyone out there looking to build a brand, looking to grow a brand. That's always something I'm interested in. It's why I have a course on how to launch your own startup called Startup Starter Kit. It's why I teach business school. I now teach at the Ohio State Fisher College of Business. Prior to that, I taught at Yale School of Management. I do believe in paying it forward and helping the next generation build better and build stronger, right? So that's something that I'm passionate about. That is why I'm going to make this video. Let's dive in. Okay, so first things first, I think we have to start by talking about venture capital, because Ami Colé, like Mented, was venture capital backed, and she talks about this in her article. And what she says, something that kind of caught my eye immediately in the article that she shared, was in 2020 when she was finally able to raise, and she had heard tons and tons of no's. I have the same story. Over 100 people said no before I got to that yes. But what flipped it for her was in 2020, the Black Lives Matter protests, George Floyd. She was able to then hear from a bunch of VCs who had previously said no, who finally found a conscience and thought to themselves, oh, maybe I should be paying more attention to Black people and Black women. That's how she was able to raise her money. But the stat that caught my eye was she said she became the 30th Black woman, or the way she phrased it was one of 30 Black women to raise over $1 million for her startup. So when she raised her million at the end of 2020, there were 30 Black women. Okay, when I raised my million, and you can check this in Forbes, there's still a Forbes article that cites this, I was the 15th Black woman to raise $1 million, and I raised that in 2017. So 3.5 years later, only 15 additional Black women had raised $1 million in venture capital. That is... It's heartbreaking. It's 5 a year, basically. So if you are a Black woman with a great big idea, the chances of you raising $1 million is going to be 5 of y'all. Hope you're one of the 5. How depressing. Because what I can guarantee you is over the course of that 3.5 years, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of white people received $1 million+ in funding. Okay. And I didn't realize that. I don't know what the number is now. My guess is not that much more than 30, which is really quite sad. But we need to start with venture capital because I do think the things I am going to say about building a brand and facing the struggles that brands sometimes face are going to be colored by being a venture capital backed brand. Some of these struggles are not going to hit you the same way if you have not raised venture capital, okay? But the landscape that is set, once you take on venture capital dollars, you effectively are on a time clock, and there is an expectation that you are headed towards an exit because these investors have to get their money back. They're not investing for funsies, right? They're investing to make a return. And there are really 2 major ways to make a return. Either a company can IPO, that's a very, very, very small percentage of companies that do that, or a company can get acquired. Particularly consumer product companies, a far more likely path than an IPO is an acquisition, right? And so once you take on that money, that's something you understand. And typically VCs are looking for that return in somewhere between 7 to 10 years, right? So they're looking at this as, I'm going to put this $200,000 check in you, $500,000 check in you, whatever it is. My expectation is that I'm going to get at least 3x that investment, hopefully more like 10x that investment in, again, 7 to 10 years time. That is the expectation. And so because she raised venture capital, much like I did, growth then becomes the primary metric that you are judged by, particularly in these times. Remember, she raised her money in 2020. I raised my money in 2017. And in these times, venture capitalists were still overwhelmingly focused on growth over everything, even more so than profit. And remember that's going to become important. Because they're so focused on growth, that's what you end up putting so much of your resources into. And again, I'm speaking for Mented. I cannot speak for Ami Colé. Am I speculating a little bit that there may have been some of this going on for her business as well? Yes, but I don't know. So I'm speaking for myself. Growth was the number one metric, and we did grow. We grew to almost $10 million in annual revenue, and we did it pretty quickly, but we did it because we were bolstered by venture capital dollars. We were not profitable. By that, I mean, we were not sustaining ourselves. Every almost 18 months to 2 years, I was raising another round. So I started with that $1 million round, which took me like a year basically to raise. I was kind of raising it in chunks. After that, I raised a $3 million round. After that, I raised a $1 million bridge. After that, I closed a $5 million Series A, right? And so all in $9 million. And I closed that Series A in 2021. That was the last bit of funding that I was able to raise because somewhere around 2022, call it into 2021, into 2022, and certainly by 2023, right? So in that kind of 2-year period between 21 and 23, interest rates went up a lot. And when interest rates go up, money is more expensive. It's more expensive for everybody. It's more expensive for you if you want to borrow money to buy a home. Believe me, I know the interest rate I paid for this house, much higher than the interest rate I paid for the house I bought in 2020. It's much harder and more expensive to borrow money. And that's true for everybody in the economy, including venture capitalists. They also are having a harder time accessing funds. So when money is not as cheap, when money becomes more expensive, people become a lot more tight-fisted with their dollars. And so what did we see? We saw the great drought of 2022. Particularly as it related to consumer product companies, because the dynamic that was going on at that time was a lot of these consumer product companies that had led the wave of consumer product investing. Think of your Warby Parkers, think of Allbirds, think of Harry's, think of Rent the Runway. A lot of these guys still weren't profitable, and they weren't consistently profitable, even though they had been in the game now for 7, 8, 9 years, even though they had raised hundreds of millions of dollars, in some cases, even though they had IPO'd like Rent the Runway, they still weren't profitable. So now you have investors looking at consumer products companies like them, right? The big guys, the ones who led the wave, and saying, okay, you've had all this time, all this money injected, you have all these revenues, you still haven't figured out profitability. Meanwhile, I can't keep pumping money into you because this money is way more expensive. So now I need to figure out, when I put my money in someplace, is the money going to come back? And what is the timeline for it coming back to me? So they're starting to get far more tight-fisted. The leaders that they were looking at before aren't panning out exactly the way they thought they would. So now they're looking at the rest of us. And by the rest of us, I mean the rest of consumer product companies that aren't nearly as big as the Warbies and the Allbirds, and saying, I don't know about this investment anymore. And that led us to the great VC drought. And so many companies got caught up in this drought, okay? It was not just Black-owned brands. I do want to be very clear about that. I was speaking to founders of every color, of every gender. I had so many conversations with founders who were like, I cannot raise. I've been trying to raise this round. These are the conversations I was having in like 22, 23. I've been trying to raise this round for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. I can't get it done. I can't get it closed. There really was a dry up, okay? The well went dry. Now, what happens if the well goes dry? Well, I can tell you what Mented did. And again, speculating a little bit that at least some of this probably did the founder of Ami Colé try, I'm sure, right? She's a very smart woman. The first thing we did was we said, okay, money's drying up. We've got to get to profitability. We did. In order to focus on profitability, we had to cut a lot of expenses, many of which were marketing related, which meant we sacrificed growth, right? So by the time I got to 2023, my run rate, I'm just going to talk about my .com revenue. I'm going to put my retail revenue to the side because retail is a whole nother conversation. We'll get to it. But my .com revenue, by the time I got to 2023, we ended at that portion of the revenue maybe being like 3.5 million versus the 5 million that we had done on .com the year before, right? Again, I'm putting retail to the side. So took a big step back when it came to top line revenue, but it was in service of profitability, and we did get to profitability. But then you're in a catch-22 where you say, okay, now I've got a profitability story I can go tell to raise this round, but investors still want a growth story. They don't want profit minus growth. They want profit plus growth. So I'm still going back out to market and realizing I still can't get this thing raised, because now, even though I've got the profit, I don't have the growth story that VCs want, and they're still super, super tight-fisted with their cash. Now, if you're wondering, okay, but if you were profitable, that means you should have been able to run on your own. Why did you still need to go to VCs? Well, that's where we get to cash flow, and that's where we get to the conversation around retail. So Mented was in 2023, over 2,000 retail doors. Between Ulta, Target, CVS, and Walgreens, we were in well over 2,000 doors. And being in retail is very, very expensive, which is why you can be profitable and not be cash flow positive. So much of the retail game requires a lot of upfront capital investment in inventory, in in-store signage and displays, in promotional opportunities, marketing. There's a ton of expense that goes into retail. And the thing about retail to remember is they want their money oftentimes up front. You're paying up front. You're paying for the inventory up front, right? Then you're going to ship it to them. They're not going to pay you for 60 days after they get it. So you run into a cash flow cycle problem. And then when they pay you, oftentimes there are chargebacks. So this is when a company might claw back some of what they are meant to pay you for any number of reasons. They might give you a chargeback because that's how you are paying for shelf space. They say, oh, you have to pay 10% of your revenue has to go to the shelf space that we gave you. Okay, so we're not going to pay you for that. They might say, oh, chargeback because you shipped us late. You shipped us late, that's a $20,000 chargeback. They might charge you back because you participated in one of their promotions. And so the way that you help, because they always expect their brands to help cover the cost of the promotion, they want to give a discount to the customer. They don't want to eat that discount. They want you to eat that discount. And so you do. So they charge you from what they were going to pay you for that inventory, right? And so not only are they paying you 60 days after you ship them, never mind the fact that you paid for that inventory probably at least 30 days before you shipped it to them. Now I've got a 90-day window, right? This is me being optimistic between when I paid for the inventory and when I get paid for it from Target. Again, 90 days is optimistic, but when they do pay, they're not paying me the full amount, right? Because of all of those chargebacks. So retail in a lot of ways can be a cash flow killer. And that is something that is not always understood or explained to brand owners when they get into the retail game. It can be a very, very expensive and very cash flow heavy game to play. So when you put those two things together, the fact that venture capital had dried up, plus playing in a big way in retail, which is very expensive and requires a lot of upfront capital, that can be a very difficult situation to sustain, particularly if you are already underfunded, which we know most Black-owned brands are. And that is how you end up in a situation where you no longer have the cash to continue running your business. Why is Mented still here, right? We face that exact scenario that I'm describing. Why are we still here? It's plain and simple because I went out and worked damn hard to get acquired. And I did it before I thought I was going to. I didn't think necessarily at that point the brand was ready to be acquired, but I knew it was sell or perish. Those were my options. And given those options, I worked damn hard to sell. And it nearly killed me. It took me almost a year to get the deal done. I could go into a lot of detail about everything that went down, but who has time? The point is, it nearly killed me. And I am so very blessed that I ended up with a partner that deeply understands Mented's value, deeply understands our customers' value, why this community matters. I mean, I feel so very lucky because I know so many brands who either weren't able to sell or who ended up selling and feel like they've ended up in homes where it doesn't feel like a home. It doesn't feel like they really understand their brand ethos. I could not be farther from that situation. I was acquired by a firm called Westlane. We are now part of Elevated Beauty Group. That's the beauty portfolio they run. It has been just such an immense, immense blessing. It has given my brand a second chance at life. We continue to be able to make our customers happy. It's been everything, but it was so goddamn hard. And it nearly killed me. And I went through very real depression and gained about 50 pounds. And I mean, it just terrible. That's why Mented is still here, though. And that's why sometimes when I see people giving Black-owned brands a hard time for getting acquired and or selling out, what I want people to remember is sometimes that is the only option, particularly when we return back to the start of the conversation, you take on venture capital. You are on a clock, right? So it was going to happen no matter what. It just ended up happening sooner and looking different than I thought it would. But at the end of the day, I still ended up, and the brand still ended up in a really great home. I'm so grateful. And I am sorry that is not what was able to happen for whatever reason for Ami Colé. It could have been because that's not what she wanted. She didn't want to sell the brand. It could be because when she went out to market, if she went out to market, I don't know if she did, there weren't any buyers who were going to be the right home for the brand. I really don't know. She may have been doing a completely different calculus than I was doing, but I wanted to share my story and share how brands end up here because my hope is this can be helpful for someone else building a brand. And the takeaways I would share, right, lesson learned are: one, be very aware if you decide you want to raise outside capital, that is putting you on a timeline, starting a timer to when you exit, and most likely that exit would look like an acquisition. So make sure that is something that you are interested in if you decide to take on that capital. Two, profitability has become, particularly for consumer product companies, profitability has become far more important to venture capitalists than it used to be as it relates to CPG. So have that in mind when you are building out your business plan. How am I going to get to profitability quickly? How am I going to make it clear that that is my focus area? What are going to be the channels that I go after that are going to allow me to grow, but grow efficiently? That's something that you're going to have to be thinking about way more than I did when I first got started, because profitability really is paramount. And then the third thing is, and I share this with any founder that I'm speaking to who's thinking about going into retail, the one thing I wish I could have done differently when it relates to retail is go into just one retailer at a time, stay exclusive to that retailer for at least a year, if not 2 years, so that I can really learn the profitability equation, what that was going to look like with that retailer. What are the marketing programs that are going to serve me well? How often should I be thinking about turning over my new SKUs, deleting SKUs? Let me really figure that out and get to a good place with that retailer before I add on another one, because each one is so expensive. Those are my primary takeaways. I hope it's helpful. I hope that this video was helpful, or at the very least interesting. If you like content like this, be sure to let me know in the comments. Also, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.